Hello, welcome to Check Your Facts, our new webinar series, talking about how to evaluate and think about your information sources critically. My name is Liz Svoboda. I am the Instruction and Outreach Librarian here at the UW Thompson Library, and we're going to start today's off with just our basic introductory to evaluating sources. Okay, with today's political and media climate, it is increasingly important to kind of understand and to think critically about your sources and where they're coming from, why they're being published. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So there's going to be a lot of kind of techniques or kind of acronyms that I'm going to introduce you to. I will try to connect them all towards the end here, but we're going to talk about SIFT, which is the 4 kind of moves that you need to do to stop and think about your sources before you're sharing them, before you're using them, especially in academic context, right? But just in general as well. We're going to talk about lateral reading and some of the questions in the CRAP method that will really help you with this and to think about why your sources are. We're going to talk about some of the different levels of sources that are out there, whether they're scholarly or popular, and kind of what comes in between those. And then we're going to kind of talk about why credibility can sometimes be contextual, right? It relates back to some of those levels of evidence, a primary versus a secondary source. But we're also going to talk about your use of the source and why that adds to the contextuality of what's going on. And we will definitely have examples in a couple of different sections throughout this. So let's get started. SIFT, called the 4 moves, invented by Mike Caulfield in 2019. He's a researcher out of Washington, and he's been really vocal about kind of the need to increase media literacy and to think about the sources of information that are coming at you on all sides. And information sources can be anything from a news story you see, from something that's on the radio, to something that gets posted on social media, TikTok videos. It can also even be just something that someone tells you, right? Word of mouth is still a form of media. So he gives you kind of 4 moves or things to do when you're looking at a source or you're hearing a source to help decide whether it's credible or not, okay? They're not exactly linear, but stop usually comes first, right? It's like, take a pause. What is this source saying, okay? Then the other 3 moves, are there to basically kind of help you think. Often investigating the source is a really good place to start, right? You want to know who this is, what their purpose is, and we'll talk about that a little bit earlier or a little bit later. Why they're so not just what they are saying in that moment, but who and why who they are and why they are publishing this information and putting this out there. With the outcome of that investigation, you have 2 different moves that you can do, right? So if you decide for whatever reason that this source isn't credible, right? It's incredibly biased. It is not relevant to what I'm looking for. They are, being overly hyperbolic and they're kind of known for this. Maybe I'm going to find better coverage, right? I'm going to go to another source and see if I can find what's going on there. But if you've investigated the source and say, no, this is credible, you still want to look into them a little bit more. So you're going to trace those claims and quotes and media back to that they are referencing, that they are mentioning in their sources back to the original context, right? So in a academic paper, this is kind of often really easy, right? There's a really formal structure of citation that you can follow back to an original source. There's a lot of the Crossref system often will link based on, object or digital object identifiers within those articles, okay? But even news sources and popular sources can do this too. So can you find the press release that a reporter is talking about? Is there a link out online to the statistics that someone is talking about, right? Is there are those links back to, the original primary sources of information? Or if you're looking at a news site, are they just trying to link you out to other articles on their site that they think would be interesting to you, okay? So tracing that sort of thing. But even if you think in like a really popular context, like a TikTok video, for example, if it's a stitch or a duet, or if it's replying to like a comment, can you go back and find that original video? Can you find the original content creator of that? So there's other things that are kind of going on within this. Okay. The other thing with Sift here is that stop comes back in at the end, or kind of in the middle. Like if you start going down a rabbit hole and are spending so much time investigating the source that it is detrimental, right? Like if you do not necessarily need to spend that much time, or you're getting kind of bogged down, stop, pause, kind of reevaluate. Do I need to be spending this much time, right? Because it can be really easy, especially when you're investigating the source, trying to find who this is, what their purpose is. We'll talk about that again in just a minute. It can be really easy to do that. And again, tracing all those claims and quotes, that can be sometimes time consuming. So try to prioritize which ones you actually need to find, because for whatever purpose that you're creating, that you are writing, that you're going to, your research is related to, that will help as well. Okay. So again, stop, investigate the source, find better coverage, trace claims, quotes, and media. So even like images or video, try to find those original content, try to find those original publishings too. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about actually investigating the source, because this can be one of those things that you really need to think about. And this is where the crap method comes in. All right. Now, I will caveat that Mike Caulfield, the inventor of SIFT, does not like crap. He does not like it. He thinks it's too clunky. And again, this is a little bit simplified to fit on a slide. However, people who are unfamiliar with doing this, or kind of novice researchers, giving them a platform and kind of a basis to start thinking about their source of information. Okay. So when we're talking about SIFT and investigating the source, you are going to want to focus on not all of these, right? All of these are really good questions to start asking yourself, especially about the content of the source itself. So after you've kind of investigated the source and gone back and said, okay, when was this written? Do I need up-to-date information? Can it be a little bit more historical? How relevant is it to my purpose of why I am writing? Also, who is my intended audience, as well as like what the source's intended audience is, right? So is it too scholarly for me to use if I'm going to be talking to the general public, and maybe I need to translate it down a little bit? Or am I talking to other scholars in the field? So I do need to find those kind of scholarly information rather than, some more popular information. Talking about authority, who wrote it, right? What organization are they a part of? If they're a standalone author, what are their qualifications or life experiences, right? If they're a journalist, do they write about this all the time? Are they kind of embedded in that, beat? If it's coming from someone talking about their own lived experiences, maybe that is also good for your purposes. With accuracy, again, this kind of ties a little bit into SIFT, right? Can you fact check this? Can you follow the footnotes, right? Are there things that you think are kind of left out of this article, like a different point of view? Or maybe if you're, looking at research and you're really familiar with the methodology, like why did they do it this way, right? So there's some things that you can think about with accuracy. Also, whether or not a source was edited or peer reviewed in any way is another good kind of check there too. And with purpose, this is also a little bit two ways, right? So what is their purpose? Like, why are they writing this? Are they just informing? Are they entertaining you? Are they trying to persuade you? Are they trying to rage bait you? Are they trying to sell you something? Or are they just, here's the facts, right? Also, is there any bias, right? No source is completely unbiased. Everybody has a point of view and a context in which they are presenting information that can lead, that is basically a bias, right? Now, how upfront they are with that bias is something to look at, right? Do they actually, do they tell you, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm a liberal, I'm a leftist, I'm a conservative, right? Or is it like coming from a particular organization? So, right, the American Heart Association says this. American Heart Association is just a research center for, heart health, right? I'm from the ASPCA. I'm from PETA, right? Is there a bias there that is kind of addressed, or really upfront, or are they trying to hide it in some way, right? Are they trying to kind of obfuscate it, use different language, again, hide it, or like not necessarily be as upfront about it? Okay. So this is crap, but as I was saying, when you're talking about SIFT and like that initial, after you've stopped and you want to investigate the source, you should be getting off of that source initially, right? We'll come back to crap and kind of look at those moves. But in order to like save yourself time, instead of going through all of those questions, you need to start thinking about not what a source says, but what other people and how you kind of found the source itself and what others are saying about it. So, right. So, how did you find the source? Did you find it through an open Google search, which again, not necessarily bad, but maybe there's a little bit of extra work you need to do in order to make sure that it's coming from good information. Or did you find it from the library, right? We've already kind of vetted a lot of our sources that are coming through to make them available to you. Did you run across it on social media, right? So how did you find the source? What's the context in which you found the source? What are other people saying about that source, right? Or who are referring back to them all the time? Like, is there a group of content creators who are all working together? And what is that kind of vibe like, right? We'll see in a second here with this example of these two organizations. But oftentimes the type of news outlets that are reporting about a particular one or a particular organization can really tell you where on the political spectrum they lie. Okay. But even like a quick Wikipedia search will also help in some instances. Now, again, Wikipedia has its own issues with credibility. However, for a really quick check, it's often a good kind of indicator of like of what is going on. Now, and again, not everything is on Wikipedia, but it is kind of a good check sometimes. Okay. And again, you can kind of go in deeper, right? Look into the history of the group or the author. Like, what do they have a digital footprint? Who is funding them? Like, are they clear about that? Why are their purposes? What are their biases? Things to kind of think about here. So again, when you're looking at this and investigating the source, you need to get off of that original source, right? You need to go out and look for additional kind of information about that source. So let's look at some examples here. That I did a Google search and found, and I'm doing a project about bullying in schools, right? I'm in my English or an education class. I'm looking for this. So I found two different sources. One is here through the American College of Pediatrics. You're like, okay, bullying at school is never acceptable, right? And it does talk about, some definitions, forms of bullying, target characteristics, preventions, stuff like, right. So it looks pretty good. But who is the American College of Pediatrics? They say down here that they are a national association of licensed physicians and healthcare professionals who specialize in the care of infants and adolescents. And they're trying to help students reach their optimal physical and emotional health and well-being. That optimal there is interesting, right? That's an adjective. Why just like it's an odd choice in it to me, right? And the other thing is when I was searching, so this came up, but also there was this other one that came up and said bullying is not okay. And it's from this blog called the healthychildren.org, but it's from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So those are really similar sounding organizations, right? And again, we've got some basic facts. There you go. What happens in bullying, effects of it, this kind of thing. So I mean, I'll go down here and we'll say that it's this. We don't have a lot of information about this because about the the American Academy of the Pediatrics, right? But maybe if I like click on here, I can go and I can see, right? So I'm getting off this initial information I saw about bullying. Okay, I see, okay, they're talking about vaccines. I can log into account, I can become a member. What's new? Recommended ages for kids to drink milk. Okay, seems pretty standard organizational here. Equity, diversity, and inclusion is included here, which again, in this climate definitely means something. Global health, places to donate. Oh, they have journals and publications. They can collaborate, you know? All right. So what kind of journals and publications do they are? Where, and up here you can see news, right? So if I want to go to, if I want to look at the news, like what are they putting out there? Okay. 14 ways to show your children love, news, campaign toolkits, pediatrics on call. So we can kind of see what's going on here and investigate their source a little bit more. So we do definitely see a decent amount of information. It definitely like it led me to when I clicked on the APA newsroom, like it took me to a because I'm on campus, it took me to the publications. And if you look here, it says the University of Michigan Flint, which means that we subscribe to them, right? So that's a good indication that, hey, this is the library subscribed to them. This is, a legit organization. They are publishing, information out there. And also they have journals and books and newsletters and other things that are coming through, right? So they seem to be doing a lot of work. Okay. So I could still, go out and do some other things, but let's take a look back here at the American College of Pediatrics. So again, similar information coming from both of them, at least on this initial kind of blog post. But when I go to the American College of Pediatrics, okay, they're optimal physical health well-being, which again is a little bit weird wording to me. Well, they've got a conference. Okay, cool. Doctors protecting children, biological integrity. What? And then we look and see, they're really coming from a very particular point of view. Okay. So again, we've got a focus on gender issues. We've got to focus on gender transitions. We've got to focus on pornography in children versus things that we were seeing that were talking about drinking milk and having vaccines and, visiting your pediatrician. So just right off the bat, looking at the homepages of these organizations is kind of telling me something. It's like, oh, okay. Oh, but they do have news, right? So let me see. Okay, they've got in the media, they have a newsletter. So, but why are they having it in the media section? And you can start to see that there's definitely people, they are, pointing to place other news organizations that they have been kind of pulled from, right? So we've got the Christian Post Reporter, the Catholic Weekly, the New American, Christian Post, New York Post, which is a little bit of a tabloidy kind of news letter. The Federalist, which is again a Republican kind of conservative institute. So I'm like, okay, if these are the types of organizations that are pointing back to the American College of Pediatrics and they're being very upfront about that, I know a lot about them, right? Off the bat, right away, I know what their biases is, what point of view they're coming from. Whereas with the American Pediatrics Voice, they're not necessarily as vocal about it, right? They're definitely trying to put out their own information. And if I look at some of the journals that they have, right, it's pediatrics, hospital pediatrics, they definitely have a little bit more. And I can even look to say, okay, pediatrics is here. There's usually information about what this is, and like an information about how to submit a manuscript. And this is something you often see with more academic publishing, is that there's a little bit of more information about what they're looking for, the peer review process, all of that here. So just by, again, looking off the site where I found that initial information, I could do that. Again, if I wanted to do a quick .org search here for it's the American Academy of Pediatrics, I get okay. American Academy of Pediatrics, largest professional association of pediatrics in the United States. Okay. Where its headquarters, maintained in offices, and again, with Wikipedia, one of the really good places to kind of look is actually in their references. So, okay, where are we going this, right? Where are they getting this information? Okay, so it's this initial one where it's talking about they're the largest association of pediatrics in the United States. That's coming from a newspaper called The Guardian, right? So maybe like that's one stat there. Maybe I want to find a little bit more information about that. A lot of this is going back to the American Academy of Pediatrics. There's not a lot of outside kind of talks about them, though there's a few things that they're pulling from of you know, from their own publications and their own pages, so being careful about that. But yet again, like Wikipedia has put together kind of some policy of positions that it puts through. So you can kind of see this. And sometimes you'll also see, like in Wikipedia articles, again, because Wikipedia is edited by so many people, there's no standard place to look for it. But sometimes you'll see things like scandals or other things like that. Or not necessarily scandals, but controversy, something like that. It'll be there. Okay. Now let's look at the American College of Pediatrics. And you'll say right off the top of it, like Wikipedia is saying that it is a socially conservative advocacy group. And that jives with what we saw on the page, right? We saw with our own eyes the types of things that they were putting out there. Again, we could go down here to look at types of sources that they're coming from. And again, a lot of this is coming from kind of outside sources about them. So we've got the Wired magazine, we've got the Virginia Law Review, Southern Poverty Law Center. So again, there's a lot of sources that are saying, hey, this is not the most unbiased source that you can get. Okay. And again, some of this is from, the normal kind of news sources or government organizations like the NIH or, Psychology Today, Washington Post, things to think about when you're looking at this. And again, they are definitely pointing back to some publications that are being put out by that initial organization as well. But you definitely see the sections for their positions, who they're affiliated with. So, right, maybe we can see who's kind of been pulled together, and again, where are these sources coming from? So again, getting off that page and looking at these sources is a really good idea. All right, so when you're initially talking about crap, you're investigating the source, start with authority and purpose, even though it's out of line with the lovely acronym, because we love an acronym that's memorable. Yes, authority and purpose probably first, right? Look at biases, who they are, who's funding them, who are they kind of being influenced by, and then go into after you've kind of judged whether something is credible or not, then go into currency, relevance, and accuracy. Okay. All right. So with this, when you're thinking about the types of sources you're looking at, you need to think about what your use is and who you're talking to. So looking at scholarly versus popular, again, we're an academic library. A lot of our patrons are looking for academic sources because they're doing research, right? So they kind of need to stay in the scholarly realm. Versus if you're going to be talking to a more general audience, maybe you want to rely on sources that they can more easily access, things that aren't necessarily behind a paywall like they are in the library subscriptions, things that are a little bit more accessible when it comes to language. A lot of scholarly information has a lot of jargon in it. So kind of comparing scholarly and popular articles, they're kind of two ends of a spectrum. Okay. So thinking about that, and again, what kind of credentials the authors and creators of these different types of sources is really useful as well. But there's again two ends of the spectrum. So in between these kind of quote unquote extremes of the spectrum, which there's still a lot of shifting in there. There's two specific kind of, I guess, midpoints in on this spectrum that I want to talk about. So one is gray literature, and these are things that are kind of published outside of traditional formats like journals, like magazines, books. A lot of the times these are going to be things like technical reports, government reports, nonprofit white papers, which are, again, so white papers are a report that's been put out by typically a nonprofit that is showcasing the research that they've done. Has it gone through that peer review process that scholarly journals go through? Not necessarily. Okay. And again, nonprofits have a very particular bias or advocacy that they have, right? Doesn't need to say that they are necessarily wrong. They're just coming from a very particular point of view. Okay. But a lot of people will actually rely on gray literature. A lot of policy decisions come from gray literature, these kind of government reports and other things that are put out there. A lot of the time, there's just like straight up statistics that are put out there in gray literature. So like census data, great example of that. Okay. Or like kind of reports put out by the census about what they're coming up. The other kind of way station I want to talk about is trade publications. These are typically kind of newsy articles or like talking about different trends in a specific industry, and they are often written by and for those professionals. So, for example, in my realm, library, I do have colleagues who publish in scholarly journals and like research how information is shared, what patrons are doing in the library, how people are finding information, just for example. But a lot of people are also talking about, hey, I tried this fun program at my library and here's how it went, right? They're talking about some of the different trends that they're kind of seeing. So just kind of staying up to date with what's going on with my field, I do read some trade publications, right? Again, they don't go through that kind of scholarly checks that a lot of times you'll see. But even like things that have like a specific interest. So for example, Stage Door, which is a really popular one for actors and producers and stuff. And that's how like people found jobs that way. A lot of them are tied to job boards. But there's also things like you can get really specific. Like I've seen some magazines for like sanitation, workers, or like water quality engineers and that kind of thing. So you can get that specific, but again, it's not necessarily research. It's just kind of this mid ground in between that scholarly and popular end of the spectrum. Okay. So the other thing I want to talk about is levels of evidence. Now, when you're looking at information, a lot of the time, especially in academic context, your professors are going to want you to try to find primary sources of information. They will use this term a lot. I used it a little bit beforehand as well. But it's basically the original documentation of an event or discovery. It's often seen as the most credible source, and it is often seen as objective. Okay. So a lot of the times in academic articles, when you are reporting out the findings of a study, primary research right there, right? This is the one study I did. Here's the results. Here's my methods. This is it. But other things like data sets, so the raw data that you have, great. Oral history, someone talking about their own experience. That's it. News reports of like current events, ongoing information, right? Like this is kind of there. Even if you're looking in if you're an art critic or like a literature professor or something like that, if you're critiquing works of literature and art, those works of arts are primary sources. Okay. So again, depending on what your field is, your primary sources will change. Secondary sources typically are going to analyze or restate information from that primary source. They're a little bit more subjective. So anything that's a criticism, a lot of non-popular or popular nonfiction books, they kind of aren't presenting original research. They're telling you about other people's research that's been done, right? A lot of narrative nonfiction falls into this. Anything that you see that's like a literature review or an editorial, or something that's kind of labeled that. Anytime there's a point of view that is like explicitly kind of saying, I think this, and it's not necessarily reporting, data and kind of original facts, that definitely has that secondary source. Okay. Now, and then tertiary sources, these are summaries, restatements, primary secondary sources. There is no new information or analysis put in these. So a lot of the encyclopedias, handbooks, dictionaries, a lot of reference type works fall in here. Now, are these hard and fast categories? Not necessarily. It really depends on the context that you're looking for. And I can't get into it in this one, but we do have another webinar, and I've got a video from the Australian National University Library that does a really good job kind of explaining like how this can be a little bit more subjective. So, but a lot of the times you're going to be focusing on primary sources with this. And even within academic articles, there are different levels of sources, right? Because larger studies typically are more validating because they've got a larger population rather than like one single instance in a case study. There's different types of methodologies that are seen as more rigorous and are more highly valued. So again, even within these different kind of levels of evidence, there might be some sub levels or some different hierarchy within there as well. So all this to say that credibility is contextual. It really depends on why you are using a source. Similarly, you kind of need to think about how this source is going to work here. So most of the time with the I-beam scheme, it is just kind of a series of questions again to ask yourself. This is a little bit simplified on the library site. I am going to make this a little bit more, explain about this a little bit more. But it talks about, you know, in instance sources like, how does your work directly relate to another source? Are you responding to a press release that came out? Are you responding to a article or a series of articles or a stream of research that's being done and you kind of want to take it in a new direction? Okay. Or are you following in their footsteps? Background sources are going to establish a fact. So these are going to be those primary sources, data, information that is just kind of there. And again, it's probably the most credible and objective. Exhibits are you kind of using the information in a source as an example of something that's going on that you're kind of trying to analyze and, give a little bit more to bolster your argument, right? Do you agree or disagree with the source? That's a really good one to look at. Again, if you're agreeing with them, or you'll kind of use again them a little bit more possibly, or if you're disagreeing, you have to tell us like why you're disagreeing with them. Okay. And then finally, a lot of method sources are going to introduce a perspective, a theory, or an experimental procedure. So are you coming at this from a feminist perspective? Are you looking at this through a lens of capitalism? Are you looking at this with a particular method or data collection or data analysis? Like, are you using a chi test? Are you looking through it through some like spatial analysis or something, right? So there's different ways that you can use sources of information. And a lot of these come up mainly through academic sources, but they can be seen in all sorts of things, okay? So most of the time, early undergraduate students, I see using sources as backgrounds, as exhibits, or as arguments, right? Upper level students, faculty are definitely using more instance and method sources, specifically when they're doing their own original research, because they have to give context to why they are doing this research, as well as what method they're following, and like, did they develop this method, is this an assessment that's been used before in some way, shape, or form. But again, giving credit to that original creator. Now, credibility is interconnected, so we're going to get a little meta, but not quite like this. It's going to look like it. It's going to look like it, but trust me, okay? So we've talked about these three different strategies, and I've already kind of shown how they're interconnected, right? But let's lay it out completely. So when you start with sick, you're going to stop and you need to investigate the source. Again, looking at authority and purpose is kind of a shortcut. Who's writing it? Why are they writing it? Okay, to verify, like, is this information that coming from a trusted source that is, and what is their purpose? Are they entertaining? Are they trying to persuade you? Are they just presenting their research? Are they trying to sell me something? Is there a bias that they have, right? Then if I've gone ahead and say, okay, this is a credible source, like these people are credible, I think their purpose is really good to have related to what my purpose is, I can go back and I can trace those media the claims and the references and the media that they are using to help with that accuracy, to judge the accuracy of what they're saying, right? I can also start thinking about my own use of this source, right? How relevant is it to me? What is my purpose in using this source of information? Is it going to be a background source for me? Do I agree or disagree with this? What method are they using that I'm going to, kind of relate back and use in my own original research? Or again, is it like just a background information that is going to support, and I need to establish this fact for my my readers before I move on, right? again, if I've gone through investigating the source, I'm like, maybe this is not something that I should be looking at. Maybe this is a little bit too biased for me. Maybe this is coming from what I would think of as an unreliable source, someone who is really trying to push an agenda and maybe skewing facts, maybe skewing figures, this kind of thing. That's when we need to stop, and then go and find better coverage, right? So again, it's this little interconnected web. It's not actually, this is not as definitely complicated as Charlie and It's Always Sunny was. But it's definitely a little bit more in depth, and they kind of interrelate to each other. Now, at any time that you start feeling going down that rabbit hole, stop, right? If you are spending so much time on this and going down rabbit holes, sometimes that's enjoyable, but you don't always need to. You do not always need to. So for example, if we went back and thought about that American College of Pediatrics, like as soon as I hit their site and they started talking about and seeing some of the news sources that they were looking at, I knew their biases, right? There's definitely coming from a Christian conservative bias there. And I'm like, I don't know if this is necessarily as important to me as a healthcare individual that they are coming from this source. Maybe I want to go try and find sources that are coming from a more objective, or information that's coming from a more objective scholarly source, like the American Academy of Pediatrics, right? So again, sometimes you don't have to go as in depth as you need to. Sometimes it's kind of really obvious. Sometimes you do need to do a little bit deeper. Do need to dig a little bit deeper. But again, if it gets too much, stop, reevaluate what you're spending your time on. Okay. So let's take a look at, I don't have quite enough time, but let's take a look at two different sources here. We already looked at some, well, we'll try to go through them. All right. So this first article here, couple things that you'll see right off the bat. So it's coming from Sage Journals, which is a major academic publisher, right? I have access through the University of Michigan. So again, you can see I found this through the library. Like this is an academic journal. It's coming through the library. I could look and view all those authors and affiliations, right? So we've got Wayne State, both coming from Wayne State at the time, right? Who they are, I can get their contact information. They have a mailing address, in fact. So again, maybe I want to look into these authors a little bit more, what other things that they've been publishing on. But as I kind of go through, I can see, oh, this is a peer-reviewed article, right? They're referring back to Pew Research Center, Sloan Center. They've got a bunch of different things. I could scroll down right off to under their contents and look directly at their methods and findings, what their analytical model looks like, right? I can go down to see who they were funded by, if they were funded at all, okay? And then you see all these references, and I could again easily kind of go and check. So like looking at the accuracy of a source like this, again, a lot of that kind of initial work is fairly easy, right? To kind of look to see what's going on here. And if I continue to read, I could look into their purpose a little bit more. Like, are they just looking into a phenomenon to see what's going on? Or is there any kind of what's the reason why that they're doing this? Okay. The second source here is coming from Forbes. All right, so Forbes is a very established magazine slash website at this point that is related to business. Okay, I can go and look to see that it's coming from their leadership and career section. I can say, okay, Kevin Cruz is the contributor, so they have an individual person that's looking here, and he covers leadership development and emotional intelligence. Okay, interesting. But there's this little information icon here that if I hover over it, it says opinions expressed by Forbes contributors are their own. Oh, opinion, right? So if I scroll down here, if it's labeled as opinion in some way, shape here, we can see that, okay, he is leaking out to like a Gallup poll. So if I click on this, it does actually go out to that Gallup poll. Okay, so there is some linkage back and forth there. If I continue though, is it going to other Forbes papers, yes, and of course I've limited the amount of time that I can see here, but it's going to other content, which isn't necessarily bad. You'll see there's a lot of ads on here because Forbes is, again, a for-profit company, magazine. There's going to be ads. The internet runs on ads. That's not necessarily a thing, but they are at least kind of labeled as ads, and it says promoted or it says advertisement, which is a good indication to say, hey, yeah, this is something that you should look at. And if I scroll all the way to the bottom, I think there's more information about the author as well. So he is a founder of CEO and LeadX, a leadership development platform, and a training company. So when he's talking about this topic of quiet quitting, he is talking from a leadership perspective, right? So there's a bias there because of his point of view. Okay, so we've already talked about who the author is, where he's coming from. We've looked a little bit at, what these links are out to without even starting to read the article even. Same thing that we did with the first one. So again, there's all these little markers that we can see about what's going on. The last one I want to pull up is, again, something that I found via a Google search, and it's from a company called Wellwrite. It's 3 reasons why employees are quiet quitting and how personalized wellness can help. Okay, so definitely kind of a little salesy right here. Corporate culture engagement is coming from their blog. There's some fun movie clips in here. There's some information. It is definitely trying to go back. So there's a Deloitte survey here. I think it also references, no, maybe it doesn't reference the same one. I thought it did. Oh, there's the Gallup poll, right? So it's referencing that same Gallup poll that we saw earlier, or a similar one. Okay. So they are trying to bring in specific information. But again, a lot of the time they are linking out to their own company to try to sell it. And if I look at what Wellwrite is, even just going on their page, they're talking about a fresh take on well-being as unique to your organization, boost employee experience and organizational outcomes. You can see our solutions up there. You'll see who's using them. So they're definitely a company who is, again, trying to sell you a health and wellness plan. And so how the information that they are pointing in here, especially towards the bottom here, there might be some information about, if you want to learn more about our services, please contact us today. So they're definitely trying to sell us something. Okay. So again, took me a little bit of time to kind of go through, but I know kind of where I'm looking for because I prepped for this. So it did take me a little bit more time initially. But even just kind of looking around again, getting off if I wanted to do another search on wellness for like Glassdoors or Wellwrite and like Glassdoor or some other kind of, open search engine to see what other people are talking about them, I could probably look at that too. Okay. All right. So that has been a really brief kind of introduction to how to start thinking about credibility. Using SIFT, stopping, investigating the source. While you're investigating that source, figuring out if you need to find better coverage, or are you tracing information back to those original sources to find, again, those sources to possibly find better coverage. When you're in craft talking about who wrote it, why did they write it, how accurate are they, how current is it, how relevant is it to my own purposes? And again, is that source, giving me background information? Is it giving me a method to follow? Do I agree or disagree with the source? Again, it's all contextual. But if you need help with any of this, please feel free to reach out to me. We have a bunch of video tutorials on the library. There's some specifically about CRAP and SIFT. I'm in the process of getting a Beam one put together. I just got a lot on my plate these next couple of weeks. But the research process guide has a lot of great information to look at, specifically about and how to get to the research process guide, excuse me. On our homepage here under research help, it is linked entirely here. You'll also see that it's kind of broken out in a couple of different places under planning your research, as well as searching and evaluating for sources. There's also some information about identifying information and understanding journals, so popular versus scholarly, what peer review is, all of that is here as well. But if I go to the research process guide, we'll just go to the whole one here. You'll see it's kind of broken down into some chunkable steps. So finding a topic, focusing that topic, finding keywords, under searching for sources, you'll see a lot of information and kind of webinars and other tutorials that we have kind of linked in here. Again, links out to understanding journals, identifying information sources. So there's a little bit of redundancy and cross-linking through here. And this is also where we have that evaluate, integrate. So we've got sift and crap, and you'll notice that we've got beam over here. I'm still in the process of like getting these a little bit more robust as well. But this is great information to have there as well. You'll see that all of these are coming through our YouTube channel. So please check us out there for a lot of additional information. But again, if you need to contact me for any reason, my contact information is here, or just even a place to ask a librarian as well. So are there any questions? Thank you for watching this recorded webinar. Find upcoming webinars to register for at libcal.umflint.edu.